Harvey Weinstein appeared in Manhattan criminal court Wednesday, and early a week after the New York Courts of Appeals overturned a 2020 rape conviction and a 4-3 decision.
The retrial is now scheduled for some time after Labor Day. Better call Brian to break it all down. Joining us now is ABC News contributor Brian Buckmire. Thanks so much for being here. It's a very complicated case. So Weinstein continues to say he's not guilty. He continues to say that any sexual activity was consensual. Let's look at this decision from the appellate court. They found what they called egregious errors. Explain this for us.
So when an appellate court says there are egregious errors, they're saying that the errors that occurred in the trial court were beyond harmless. It wasn't enough to affect the outcome of the trial. And for the most part, they're saying that there were too many what we call Molyneux witnesses or Molyneux evidence. Witnesses who testified to allegations that Harvey Weinstein wasn't facing actual crimes for. And if you do the numbers, there were 3 victims whose allegations are associated with actual crimes and 4 that were not egregious that the judge allowed these witnesses to testify in the way that they did, because it appeared that those 4 witnesses didn't add any other evidence other than a propensity to commit crimes, and the Molyneux rule says you're not allowed to do that.
So what is the prosecution up against in retrying this case, and could Weinstein take the stand? So
the good thing for the prosecution is the Court of Appeals basically gave them a roadmap. If you do this, this is how the case gets reversed. If you don't do this, there's a potential that it would not get reversed. But the biggest challenge in a case like this is asking the victims to testify again. It is not easy to go to trial. It's extremely difficult to go a second time. And I know there's some reporting that some of the victims have said they would and some have said they wouldn't. But I think at this point, the prosecution's greatest difficulty is going forward. In terms of whether or not Harvey Weinstein will testify, one of the rulings that the Court of Appeals said is because of the way that the trial court kind of stacked the deck against him, it kind of had a chilling effect as to whether or not he would testify. Now, if you change that ruling, it opens the door as to whether or not he could potentially testify. I think it's a greater chance, but I'm not 100% sure if he will.
Let's talk about the thing that Weinstein's attorneys pointed out was that the obvious difference in the proceedings is Judge Curtis Farber. You know this judge. You've sat in the courtroom for Weinstein's first trial. Do you think having a different judge in this case is going to actually make a difference?
So I've actually been in front of Judge Farber. Before he was a Manhattan judge, he was a Brooklyn judge, and I've done trials in front of him. And in fact, he was the only judge that I've ever seen that withheld a video because the prosecutor couldn't get it in, and then dismissed the case before it even ended, based on evidentiary rulings. And so when I think of Judge Farber in that sense and in this case, yeah, I do think it's a big difference, because some of the rulings that were made in the initial trial, I don't think would have happened under Judge Farber. So do I think that Harvey Weinstein is going to walk because Judge Farber is on the case now? No. But I do think the evidentiary rulings will fit more with what I'm accustomed to seeing in court. And for a defense attorney, a little bit of fairness in that goes a long way. So I think that's why they're so happy about Judge Farber being on the case.
I want to go back to the Molyneux witness. What is a Molyneux witness, and how rare is it that it happens here in the state of New York?
I'm going to avoid the legal talk, and I'm just going to give you an example that works a lot easier. Right now, and babies are on my mind because I have a 2-year-old at home, my son continually steals my breakfast. He eats his breakfast and then he goes and he takes mine. And so every time I try to bring a case against him, the Honorable Mrs. Buckmire, who that's her official title at home, says you can't bring up the prior bad acts of him stealing waffles from you to prove that he steals waffles. So that's that whole propensity issue. You can't use prior bad acts or crimes to prove a case. I'm saying, no, there's an exception. And the exception comes in the form of an acronym, MIMIC. Motive, identity, mistake or lack thereof, identity, and then common scheme or plan, right? So my argument would be, I'm not trying to use the prior instances of my son stealing my waffles to show that he has a propensity for stealing waffles. I'm trying to show the lack of mistake. He knows what he's doing. I'm trying to show there's a common scheme or plan, and that exception allows me to bring those prior bad acts. In the Harvey Weinstein situation, they're saying that those exceptions didn't exist. You were using his prior bad acts to show he had a propensity to commit these crimes, and that's why the case was reversed. But there is a way of navigating this that does work in many ways.
We have to talk about the fact that this isn't Weinstein's only conviction. He was also found guilty for sex crimes in an LA court and sentenced to 16 years in California. Everyone's now looking at that case. Is that decision at all in question now after what we've seen happen here in New York?
So it's not in question in the sense of the California case was litigated a little bit differently than the New York case in terms of the number of Molyneux witnesses. But definitely, both prosecutors and defense attorneys in California will look at this ruling in New York and try to compare and contrast to see if there are arguments that they can make. But there might be other appellate issues that they could argue, whether it be the statute of limitations or things of that sense. But right now, Harvey Weinstein is is not walking out of prison because the case in New York was reversed. He's still being held based on the case in California. However, he was brought from a New York prison down to a New York jail so that he can hear the charges against him in the New York case and potentially be retrialed, as we've already said.
This is fascinating, to say the least. All right, Brian Buckmire. Brian, thank you very much. We appreciate it.